online MAPme Symposium or webinar. I want to thank everyone for showing up today. Our topic for today is going to be the benefits of community-engaged citizen science approaches and non-traditional collaborators in behavioral genetics research. More specifically, we're going to hear a talk that focuses on rethinking the ways in which we conduct research in the late 2000s, or the early 2000s. I'm very pleased to be able to introduce today our speaker. His name is Dr. Danielle Dick. She is the director of the College of Behavioral and Emotional Health Institute at Virginia Commonwealth University and the co-director at Spit for Science, as illustrated by the very lovely shirts behind her. She is professor of psychology and human and molecular genetics at Virginia Commonwealth University, and she originally earned her PhD back in 2001 at Indiana University. Since then, she has published numerous articles and has over 21,000 citations. In addition to that, she's received many numerous awards, some of which include being elected a fellow to the Academy of Behavioral Medicine and Research, as well as being a Ted Wright Young Investigator Award for the International Society of Psychiatric Genetics. Dr. Dick's research interests tend to focus on how genetic and environmental influences contribute to the development of various patterns of substance use and related behaviors. Most importantly, how that information can be used to help inform intervention and prevention research for our young people. Her team is currently studying how environmental risk factors, such as peers and neighborhood, parental monitoring, and a whole slew of home atmospheric influences both come in play with the genetic factors that we know runs in families and how those things interact to bring about behaviors that we sometimes witness before college, during college, and beyond. She's involved in several collaborative studies, one of which looks at the genetics of alcoholism. Her lab also coordinates the gene typing component of several longitudinal developmental studies with extensive phenotypic assessments spanning from early childhood to middle adulthood. These studies include the Mobile Youth Survey, as well as the Avon longitudinal study of parents and children. In addition to that, a study that is very familiar to us here at MAPme is the Spit for Science project. Spit for Science is a longitudinal study that began at Virginia Commonwealth University and is currently growing. And it has enrolled over 10,000 VCU students since its inception. Currently, they are following up with students to continue to study risk and protective factors for substance use and emotional outcomes, not just those that happen in the college years, but in life after college. For those of you who are interested in learning more for Spit for Science, I'm going to give a shout out and say that you should go out and check Spit for Science with the number 4.vcu.edu. Today, she comes to us to discuss the translational goals of community-based contextualization of research dissemination. An emphasis there is on the transparency in how we go about doing research reporting. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Danielle Dick.
Thanks, Rohit.
At this time, thank you. I'm going to ask, as I turn the mic over to Dr. Dick, that everyone, as they're listening to the conversation, to the presentation, to place their questions in the chat box, and so that we can go back at the end of the presentation and answer those questions. Dr. Barfield, who is the session host, will be directing that latter half of the meeting. So at this point, I'll turn the meeting over to Danielle.
Great, thank you. Well, I'm sorry that I couldn't be there in person with you all, but I thought that since we were all stuck in our respective home places, I would do something a little fun and put up a smorgasbord of our Spit for Science t-shirts through the years here as my backdrop. So today what I'm going to do is talk to you about, as Rohan mentioned, the Spit for Science project, and I'm going to be light on science and findings and really talk to you more about the launching of the project, the rationale behind it, how we went about doing it, And I think most importantly, what we're doing with the results. And so that's what I'm hoping to cover. And then I am looking forward to answering any questions that you all have. I'm really excited about your MAPme initiative as well. And I think there's a lot of opportunity to collaborate. And so I'd love to think more about that while we're all together here. So I have been doing this for about 20 years or so now. And I will start with my confession, which is that most all of my projects before Spit for Science went on all around the world. So I was working with secondary data, and participants really were numbers in a computer screen to me. And I thought a lot about the science. You know, most of us go into science because we want to discover things and make a difference. But I thought of my contribution based on my training as writing up research articles and giving those out to the world and writing grants to continue the science. And I never really spent a lot of time thinking about what happened once I put that research into scholarly articles. And at some point I realized I really want to do more to make sure that our research is actually making a difference. And launching the Spit for Science project is a place where we've really been able to do that. And that's why I really subtitled this, When a Research Project Becomes More Than a Research Project, when it becomes about more than just the research you're generating, but how you're actually using that research as well. So to get us all on the same page here, Spit for Science is a university-wide research opportunity that we run for all incoming VCU freshmen in the years that we recruit for data, which is really purely a product of funding. We'd run it every year, but it turns out it's an expensive project to run, so we haven't been able to do that. But we launched it in fall of 2011. And really the scientific goal, very similar to many of the other projects that I run, was to understand how genetic influences come together with environmental influences to contribute to substance use and emotional health, in this case, among college students. And our idea of focusing on our college student population is, of course, because we know that substance use and mental health challenges are prevalent. 1 in 4 individuals over 18 is affected by them. That's what led me to go into this area of research, the idea that we really have potential to make a big impact. We also know that college-age populations are entering a high-risk period. So substance use, the area that I work in, doubles between adolescence and young adulthood. We know that there's a lot of high-risk binge drinking, as well as growing rates of other illicit drug use. And in a particular study that I still find pretty profound, these are data out of the University of Maryland that followed a cohort of college students. They found that nearly half of students met criteria for a substance, an alcohol or marijuana specifically use disorder, many of those being in the mild range, but at least once during their first 3 years. We know that this isn't just kind of, oh, well, people are a little crazy in college and then they mature out. There are actually far-reaching consequences associated with risky substance use. So legal consequences, assaults, injuries, unwanted sexual encounters, suicide, death. It hurts their grades, their academics, which is what they're ultimately in college for. And not only that, it affects other people at the university. So there's some really interesting studies showing that in places where there's higher substance use among the undergraduate body, that the entire communities report more noise disturbances, more crime, etc. It's not just substance use, of course. There have been rising rates of depression and anxiety in college students as well. And college counseling centers are reporting really drastic increases in the number of students who are seeking help. Probably some of that might be due to true increases. We could talk a little bit about why we think that might be happening. And some of it is probably just due to a greater willingness to seek help, which is a great thing. Now, I think college is really a tremendous opportunity, and for those of us that work in college settings, to make a difference in this space. College is a funny bird in the sense that it's one of the only times in an individual's life where a single setting encompasses all their primary activities. So career-related, social, services related to health, safety, well-being, we actually have a lot of quote unquote control over our students' lives. Perhaps less so now that they're not on our campuses, but traditionally. We also know that they're in an important life phase for establishing behaviors that we know will last into adulthood. So the idea that, well, in college I'll stay up late and eat unhealthy, but then once I graduate, I will start, quote, real life, that actually that is completely untrue, that the behaviors that get established in college tend to persist into adulthood. And most importantly, by nature of the teaching and research missions of universities, we are well positioned to make a difference in this space, to develop best practices for how to address health and well-being for this large group of individuals at this important developmental stage. But the problem is, by and large, we're not. So NIAAA, National Institute of Alcohol Abuse and Alcoholism, more than 15 years ago came out with recommendations for best practices for how to address risky substance use on college campuses. And then a group of researchers went back 6 years later and assessed universities across the country to see how they were doing. Well, almost a quarter of them didn't even know that there were recommendations for how to address this on campuses. Almost everybody says they're doing something, but only about half of all universities were doing anything with any proven effectiveness. In fact, what most people said they were doing was education, and there's strong evidence that education alone is actually ineffective. So we have a lot of room for doing better. And at VCU, back at the time when we were launching this project, the university had a new president, was also rebranding, and really the focus of our very urban public university our tagline is make it real. So the idea that learning is not about going off to an Ivy Tower. It's really about how do you have learning that connects to the real life and does that while you are at university. We also have a lot of faculty at VCU who work in the space of substance use and mental health outcomes. We were fortunate in that we had strong partners in our prevention and intervention center, and the university was really making a big push for cross-campus collaborations and a big focus on student success. So Bev Warren, who was the provost at the time that we launched this, when we were in conversation with her about creating this university-wide project, what she really said is that Spit for Science has to be about more than the research of a few faculty members. It has to be about what it can do for our students and our university. And when she said that, it was something that I really took to heart. It brought me out of my research lab and really onto the campus streets, so to speak, to think about how we could ensure that we were using the science to make a difference. So what's in it for the students? The whole idea is that we are going to use this project as a way to bring an area where there's preeminent research here at VCU. So we're one of the top 10 funded universities in the country if you tally up funding from NIDA, NIAAA, and NIMH, meaning we have tons of faculty working in this space. And how do we bring together those faculty and bring this research home to our university? So we use the project as a way to introduce students to the importance of research at universities. We use it to start a dialogue about behavioral and mental health challenges, also about how our health is a product of both our genes and our environments and how they come together. The fact that we're not all equally at risk, but at the same time, having a predisposition does not destine anyone to develop problems. And so it's this dance between genes and environment and how they come together. We also wanted to use the project as a way to have the results feed back into our prevention and intervention programming at VCU. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about each of these pieces. The actual mechanics of the survey are that it is an online 30-minute survey. It has questions about personality and behavior, family, friends, experiences growing up. When we are doing data collection, we invite faculty to submit items. We really talk about it being kind of a mile wide and an inch deep, meaning that other than the areas for which there's direct NIH funding, which we are sure to obviously assess well, we try and include enough measures from a diversity of areas that different faculty can use this also as preliminary data or to spin off on for more extensive projects, which I'll discuss. There's a DNA component, which we do via saliva sample. And then we do longitudinal follow-ups each spring semester thereafter. So initial survey when they show up on campus, and then follow-ups every spring thereafter. We also do a lot of outreach about why there is a genetic component to the project, about the fact that environments are only part of the story. And so if we just study that part, then we are missing the other half of the equation as to why some people are more or less at risk than others. And really, the project has gone quite well. So we've enrolled 5 cohorts now. We continuously enrolled cohorts from 2011 to 2014. We took a break while I was actually moved from the School of Medicine to the undergraduate campus to grow these initiatives. And then we relaunched another cohort in 2017. We get just under 70% of all incoming freshmen who participate. They can do the survey part, but choose not to do the DNA part. So the way that we actually do it is they get $10 for participating and a free Spit for Science t-shirt. They come in to collect their compensation. And then at that point, we've told them all about the DNA piece previously, but then we have privacy booths set up where they can do the saliva sampling and they get an additional $10. And we find that almost all participants also choose to do the DNA portion. I would love to think that is because of all the outreach that we do about why that part of the project is so important. They do get an extra $10, which probably influences participation in that as well. So we are now up to more than 12,000 students, and those students importantly look very representative of overall VCU, which I'll show you. All of the data go into a registry which can be accessed by any VCU or outside faculty member. So for anybody who is out there and might want to look at, for example, how your data from MAPme compare to Spit for Science, we have a mechanism set up to share the data with anyone who's qualified and interested in looking at it. So this is what the participation in Spit for Science looks like. This is the gender breakdown. So shown here in blue, it's for overall VCU. And then in yellow, it is for the Spit for Science participants. And as you can see, it maps very closely. We were very proud of our VCU male students because, as I'm sure you all know, females tend to disproportionately volunteer to be a part of research. But in fact, our male students are participating at high rates as well. And VCU is also a diverse university. So one of the things we really celebrate is our diversity in terms of racial ethnic diversity, as well as many other facets. Shown here is self-reported racial ethnic ancestral background. And so what you can see here are in blue, this is the distribution of students who report that racial ethnic background from overall VCU. And here's the distribution for Spit for Science, shown in yellow. And as you can see, they map very closely onto one another. In particular, we are housed in Richmond, Virginia, which of course was the capital of the Confederacy. And if you would all look at the city's history as well as VCU's history, there's really been a lot of shameful and discriminatory practices that have happened here in Richmond and that continue to play out today in terms of health inequalities. We worked very closely with the then chair of African American Studies, who's now our vice president for Inclusive Excellence, to do a lot of outreach to, in particular, our African American students. We wanted to be sure that this was a project that everyone felt comfortable participating in. And we know that for for many good reasons. There has been a mistrust of particular biomedical research by communities of color. And so we did outreach. He led outreach efforts with students, parents, and faculty of color to understand their concerns. And then we adapted our recruitment strategies and marketing accordingly. I'm happy to talk more about that. But we are really proud of the fact that we are one of the few genetic studies where there is a proportion of African Americans that's representative of the sample from which it's drawn. You will see the only place we have a little bit of underrepresentation is in our Latinx students. And I will tell you that we actually talked to a faculty member who works with our, who runs our Latinx student organization. And the reality is that we didn't have someone who, in the same way that we did for our African American students, who was willing to lead those efforts. And in addition, many of the recommendations, like translating everything into Spanish, as well as sending those materials to the home as well, were just not things we had the funds to do. And you can see we have a little teeny bit of underrepresentation of our Hispanic students. And I mention that just because I think what this shows is when you make a difference, it works, essentially. And when you don't, then that is reflected as well. So what we have done with the project is really used it to build collaborations across the campus. So we have more than 150 faculty and pre- and postdoctoral trainees from 28 different departments across all the schools represented on the campus who are working with the data. As I mentioned, when we do the surveys and we launch new data collections, we put out a call for instruments. And so we've had more than 35 faculty and students who have contributed item content. And just to give you kind of a little sense of what that looks like, in addition to all the basic things that we collect routinely every time about substance use, mental health outcomes, well-being, you'll see we've also had a variety of things that get added that are specific to different researchers' interests. So things like pet ownership, as well as sleep, social media usage, things like perfectionism. You can see a variety of things that have been added along the way here to enabling us to look at particular research questions. In addition, the registry is set up such that all students who participate in the project agree to recontact. So that means that they are agree to be contacted for other what we call spin-off studies. So these are faculty members or trainees who want to access a subset of the participants based on some aspect of the data and do a more intensive study. And then of course the benefit is that that can be linked up to the wealth of other existing data that is in SPIT for Science. And so as just an example of some of the spin-off projects that we've already done, we've got another 6 or 7 that are underway currently, but we've done things like imaging, brain imaging of binge drinking, heavy binge drinking students. We've done ecological momentary assessments looking at smoking and mood throughout the day. We've done a lot of more in-depth trauma assessments with a faculty member who works in PTSD and has led those studies. We're doing things like personalized alcohol interventions, faculty who are looking at racial ethnic identity and experiences among minority students, etc. So what happened is it became clear that this was becoming much more than just a research study. This was really becoming a large collaborative effort, and that all the things that we were trying to do were more than just a traditional research project. And that was the background behind launching COBE, or the College Behavioral and Emotional Health Institute. And so the idea was to essentially use this research to promote behavioral and emotional health in our college communities. I started off talking about how this is something, these are issues that affect all of us. So why not use our research to benefit our community? Sometimes we think of our community as our community being outside of the university, and of course that's the case, but we are also a rich community within the university, and there's a lot of needs there as well. So what we try and do is integrate the research with coursework coursework, programming, and policy in order to promote behavioral and emotional health. And then ideally to be able to do the research to see if it's working. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of these other areas. So I've talked some about the research registry itself, but I'm going to talk a little bit about how we have integrated that research into teaching and translational efforts as well. So one of the things that we have done from the very beginning is we have run the Spit for Science research course. So the undergraduates have always been a pivotal part of the research team. When we have active data collection, they essentially are out there recruiting other students and getting the word out about the project. In addition, they also work with the data. So we put them in small teams, we pair them up with graduate students who moderate the course, and they work on projects related to areas that, that they pick, essentially. We run the course every semester. We've worked with more than 250 undergrads. We don't have any kind of requirements. They have to apply to be in the class, and we usually get more than 100 students who apply for 15 slots every semester, so it's really popular. But we try and select students from a diversity of backgrounds and departments, and I'll show you toward the end some of the reasons why we think that's so beneficial. But one of the things I think is really fun is all of their findings, they present posters. It sounds very similar to some of the things that you all were doing. I had a chance to get to look at some of yours this morning. And then we put those in a VCU Scholar, essentially, database that's accessible and broadly open. And Amy Adkins, who's a faculty member in my group, who's really passionate about teaching, though her background, she trained with me as a postdoc, so she's very familiar with the research, but her passion is teaching. And so she tracked, and I think it's really exciting when you look and see that, you know, in just, there's been more than 1,400 downloads of the students' research findings. So I think sometimes, you know, some of you all might feel like, oh, I do this project and that was really neat and interesting, and I do the poster and I present it, and then you move on to your next thing. But in fact, those findings are out there, and they live on, and you know, here thousands of people are actually downloading our student work, and you can see it's from all over the world, which I think is really exciting. The students absolutely love the class. As I mentioned, it's really popular. And one of the things we know that, of course, being involved in intensive experiences like research are associated with a variety of positive experiences in terms of how well students do in university and how connected they feel to their universities. And Amy, because she is a researcher, collects data on our students and keeps in touch with them and has a whole alumni database and set of newsletters. And they consistently come back and say that it was one of their favorite experiences. So that's something that we have been really excited about. In addition, we do individual research internships. So this would be a semester-long individual mentored experience. And we mentor a variety of the students, but perhaps even more importantly, what we try to do is to pair students and target them with other faculty. And so we've developed a variety of partnerships around the university to strategically enroll students from different backgrounds and then pair them up with other faculty with their interests so that they can get relevant experiences to what they want to go on to do. We also, because the class was so popular and we couldn't take any more students in that in order to maintain the really intensive experience, as you all know, it takes a lot to train in research. So we developed a summer boot camp. And this was a week-long intensive experience. So it's essentially all day, and they would learn basic statistics. They'd learn how to navigate the Spit for Science database and all the variables. And then they would be matched with a faculty mentor. So now the students have some background and knowledge which makes them useful. They know how to navigate this big database and do some basic things. And So they can then benefit from having a faculty mentor, and the faculty mentor can benefit from the fact that this student can help them with getting in and looking at perhaps the variables they might have added to the questionnaire. We also do cohort mentorship meetings beyond the boot camp. We have gotten a grant from NIAAA now that funds 10 positions to do this intensive summer-long research experience for students from underrepresented backgrounds. Of course, we know that one of the things that is an impediment for many students from underrepresented backgrounds is that they don't have the luxury of being able to volunteer in a research lab or to take a summer to work with a faculty mentor because they have other obligations or need to have a job to pay for school and those kind of things. So this helps alleviate some of that in terms of providing them with a summer stipend. And then we continue to do a lot of career mentorship assistance with applying to graduate school, and we keep the cohorts engaged throughout the year. We have also developed a class with faculty. We team teach it. It's an undergraduate class, but it's team taught by faculty who are all working with the Spit for Science data. And the whole idea was that many of us who do a lot of research, we essentially buy out of teaching. So I don't have any undergraduate teaching, for example. And what we wanted to do is to make sure that students had access to researchers who were doing cutting edge research, and that we had a way to give the findings back to the students. It turns out that getting students to sign up for Alcohol Prevention 101 is not something that they are highly inclined to do. However, everybody loves to sign up for Science of Happiness. So as the parent of a picky eater, I call this class my version of chocolate covered broccoli, meaning what we are essentially doing is teaching them about what causes substance use, mental health challenges, what is the science behind the promotion of well-being, and then we teach it in a way that it's very it's evidence-based, but it's also getting them to reflect on their own lives and do activities that applies the science to their own lives. So essentially what we're doing is prevention programming, but we're doing it in the context of also giving them a scholarly experience. And the best part is that unlike having to do our alcohol prevention programming, which we have to mandate or force them to do, they willingly want to take Science of Happiness. So this is now a course that we started, and now our university college runs and has continued. And we also, there was a 1-credit spin-off class that the Honors College also built out and developed and made mandatory for all of their students too. And this busy slide is essentially just saying that we also work with faculty from all kinds of different departments, everything from, our arts, we have a top school of the arts, to our special education, to our behavioral health policy classes, our mass communications school, to essentially find ways to connect students to what has for them been something that they all participated in, and for them to get to be thinking about how the research connects to their own areas of interest. And so as just one example of this, our mass communications class, our marketing classes, they essentially take on the findings from Spit for Science as their client. And the whole idea is, how do you get the word out about things like substance use or about things like the dangers of e-cigarettes? We essentially give them a variety of findings, and then they create marketing campaigns surrounding those results for how they would get that out to their peers. So rather than, me, scientist who has been doing this for a few decades and is now removed from the college experience, instead of me trying to figure out how to get this out to students in a way that's meaningful to them, the students are working on how to get this out to other students in ways that are meaningful to them. We have our students from School of the Arts who have developed different types of infographics and memes to get the findings out. And so we've done a lot of fun things like that, which vary from semester to semester depending on what faculty are interested in doing. But we always try and find ways to partner to get the findings out to the students. We also do a lot of explicit things where we are working on translating the findings in more traditional prevention intervention ways. So, for example, we partner with our wellness center. You all may have some version of this at Emory. Our wellness center produces something called the Stall Seat Journal that they put on the back of all of the bathroom stalls. I'm told it's more than 1,300 stalls throughout the university. They swap them out every month. And what they do is they essentially profile findings from Spit for Science in those newsletters. So everybody's going to the bathroom at some point on campus, not currently, but usually. And so this has been a way that we can give the findings back to the students. This happened to be a whole issue focused on you spat for science, here's the science. In addition, our wellness center does a really popular series called Love and Liquor. And our previous wellness director was just amazing. She used to say that if she hadn't gone into wellness, she would have been a comedian, and I think she would have done well. So the students, she'd get about 90% of all incoming students who would come through her Love and Liquor sessions, and she would use that to talk about the findings, to talk about the study and what we were trying to do with it. We also have a grant where we're essentially using the findings about what are the individual risk factors that put students at elevated risk, both genetic and environmental, and developing personalized feedback programs for the students via tailored online apps. So that's an ongoing grant that we were able to get as a spinoff. We also got an award to map all of the Spit for Science data to other university data sets. So essentially any other data other than the students' health records that the university collected, we are able to match with our big database of Spit for Science information. And so, for example, we can match in information about obviously like GPA, courses, credits, all of those kind of things. But in addition, we can also map it to university participation, involvement in different types of clubs or activities, and all of those kind of things too. We actually just had a paper that was just accepted in the Journal of College Health that will come out looking at all the Spit for Science factors as they relate to GPA. And as you might expect, you see these really interesting and profound relationships. But for our administrators to see it as it relates to our students on campus has been powerful. So if you look at retention is an issue at VCU, as it is at many places, and we are aiming to continually improve retention. And what this basically just shows is it maps on the number of substances students say that they have tried. And this is collapsed across a variety of different types of substances. So everything from tobacco, alcohol, and different types of illicit drugs. And essentially, the more that students have used, you can see students here who are not using at all have about a 20% chance of leaving the university by their third year. So after their first 2 years, because second to third year was a big retention point we were interested in. Overall retention is, or dropout is about 24%. So you can see if they're not using, then they are at or a little bit below average. But of the students who are polysubstance users, more than 40%, so almost half of them are gone by the time they leave, or by their third year. So this clearly shows us areas where we can target students for support. Conversely, you can see things like involvement in rec sports. And this is not just going to the gym. This is also taking part. Rec sports does a variety of wellness programs. You know, they'll do yoga, they do mindfulness programs, they have rec sports. They have actual teams in addition to gym usage. And this is essentially showing that the more individuals are engaged, the lower their chances of dropping out of the university. So you see a really profound effect here as well. So we can both look at risk factors that are related to increased likelihood that students will not succeed and make it through their time at the university, as well as things that can work to retain them at the university. We have worked with our residence halls to try and infuse a variety of programming that is related and known to promote health and well-being. And so now they've started things like mindfulness and meditation sessions. And we also then have faculty who work in different areas related to substance use and mental health and well-being who have done, we started fireside chats where they would kind of do evening programming, and the residents would order pizza for the dorms, and it was kind of get to know faculty members on a more personal level and learn about different areas of research. So a variety of things like that that we have integrated into our residence hall experiences. We also partner with our RAMS in Recovery, our collegiate recovery community, to put together an annual town hall symposium every year. So we essentially advertise regionally, and this was the brainchild of a member of my group who came out of the, essentially from the community. He worked on homelessness and substance use. And when he was embedded in our group and started working with me on COBE, he essentially said to me, Danielle, you don't realize how many people out there do not know the things that you all consider super commonplace, kind of the base level of research that you think everybody understands. It's not getting out. And so through his connections with all of these community health boards and practitioners and local schools, we organized this now annual, and unfortunately just got canceled because it was in this month too. And we've had more than 300 attendees every year. We spotlight both VCU researchers as well as outside speakers. And if you go to our website, cobe.vcu.edu, the Department of Behavioral Health generously co-sponsors the conference. And what that has enabled us to do is to produce high quality video professional recordings of all of the talks. And so they are all archived and available for anyone. I know they've been used in different classes and things of that sort. And you can find them all at cobe.vcu.edu. So finally, last thing I'll talk about today is we have, as I mentioned, partnered with a variety of students in mass communications to try and just use a number of different outlets to spread science. So we've created the COBE website, which brings in a number of visitors. We have had mixed success, I would say, with social media. It depends on, candidly, whether or not we have someone who's actively engaged in leading those efforts. We've created a lot of original COBE content, as I just mentioned, that you can find through our website. We had a student from mass communication who produced a Why Science podcast. We have students and faculty write blogs about science coming out, and we host those on our website as well. And then we create a newsletter which goes out to all of the COBE collaborators and essentially keeps folks up to date on what's going on. And we've really, one of the things that I think has been one of the most fun parts of the project has been collaborating with what I might call these non-traditional collaborators. So often when we talk about interdisciplinary collaborations, we talk about me as a geneticist collaborating with a psychologist, for example, right? Or someone who works on the brain collaborating with someone who works in genetics. And yes, that is interdisciplinary collaboration, and yes, it is important. But often we overlook or don't immediately think of our colleagues who have so much to offer in terms of creative ways of getting science out. And so I have found our partnerships with students and faculty in mass communications, in media sciences, and in the School of the Arts to be among some of the most interesting and exciting. And I'm just going to give you a little snippet. This was one semester we allowed one of the things that we tried out was we had students produce as their final project. They could produce any sort of final project that essentially took the science to broader audiences, which they could define. So we had our students who, for example, were interested in going into graduate school, who did more traditional research posters and presentations. But this was something that was produced by one of our students who actually was interested in marketing. Let's see if this will play. Oh, it won't let me play and share at the same time. Hold on real quick. I'm going to see if I stop share, it will let me show it to you in a different way here. Okay, let's see if this happens to work. Oh, for some reason it is not working via Zoom. Sorry about that. I can try one last ditch effort really quickly here to see if I can get it to play for you all. Nope, for whatever reason, sorry, on Zoom it does not seem to want to play. So sorry about that. But if you could see it, then essentially what it shows is it's a student who put together a compilation of pictures of essentially spit. So a baby drooling, a couple kissing, a little kid spitting water at a pool, and it just goes through with this fun music as the background. This whole series of kind of crazy photos that you're trying to figure out what's going on. And then at the very end it says, "You're not using it anyways, spit for science." And I thought that that was just a really creative way that a student could essentially took their background, their creative background in thinking about how they could get the word out about science, in this case about the project, in ways that we would have never done essentially as scientists. Essentially, that wasn't what we had thought of, and that's not how we operated. So I'm going to really quickly go back to sharing the original presentation here for you. Okay. Rohan, can you just confirm for me that you can once again see the presentation?
I do.
Okay, perfect. Having toggled through lots of screens, I wanted to make sure. So essentially, what I hope that what I really wanted to convey to you all is that what we have tried to do with this project is use it as a model for growing research, essentially, and then translating that research in meaningful ways. So that meaningful ways that go beyond just thinking about research, publish in journals, get a grant, do the next set of research, or work with someone to do prevention intervention, but really, how do we think creatively about all of the avenues that are open to us as faculty, as students, as trainees at a university to get the word out? How do we make use of the rich skill set of expertise that exist on our universities and in our surrounding communities to do creative things with science that we wouldn't have traditionally thought of if we were working within kind of an old school classic mentality of simply get grant, run analyses, write it up, move on to next project? I think we have great potential to do a lot more with our science. And with that, I will wrap up by saying, let's collaborate. As I mentioned, everything that I talked about is all part of a registry. It is broadly available to anyone. I know you all are doing really exciting things on your campus, and I would love to use some of our time to talk more about those, about what you all are doing, and about ways that we might do more together as well. So with that, thank you very much. That's all that I had, and I'm hopeful that I left time for us to have a conversation about things that we can do together. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Dick. That was an excellent presentation. I'm sure that I can speak for everyone on this meeting that you really showed a full range of things that we can do with this type of research. And I have an interest in this, specifically the translational space and implementation science and disseminating research. So this was right up my alley. I thoroughly enjoyed it. So I do want to take time now to ask if anyone on the meeting has a question, please enter it in the chat box now, and I will read the question out for Dr. Dick, and she'll get back to you with the response. So I'll just take a look now. Okay, one second. So yes, if you have questions, you can go ahead and put it in the chat box. So don't type it to me directly, but put it directly into that chat box at the bottom of your screen. So I have a question about collaboration. I know that you've alluded to that several times during your talk, and that you're able to share your data. Have you ever collaborated with anyone or any group outside of your institution just yet? And what does that look like to you? What types of opportunities do you suggest that we start to think of if we want to make this type of collaboration with you?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have, and honestly, when we were launching the project, so much of it was getting the word out within VCU that I think that's why the internal collaborators grew so quickly. But the intention has always been for it to be a broad resource for the field, essentially. And so we have a registry coordinator who anyone who is interested in collaborating, and I think we've got about 15 or so outside collaborators with active data sharing agreements. So the way that it works is if you send me an email and say, you know, hey, I'm interested in working with the Spit for Science data and I'm interested in XYZ, you know, electronic cigarette use, for example, then what I do is I loop in our Spit for Science registry coordinator, and she will start by giving you access to our collaborator area. You can also go to spitforscience.vcu.edu, and there's some information on there, but she can give you access to a box area, box.com area, where you can have, we'll see all the surveys that we've ever collected, an overview table of all the constructs that we have data on, information about the sample, and also information about how you go about becoming a collaborator. And really, we try and make it as easy as possible. It's essentially a short, I think it's like a one-page data sharing agreement. And you just write a description of what you're interested in looking at. And then you have to agree that you're not going to do any, you know, things that would violate IRB policy, like try and identify students, and that you have secure servers for the data and those kind of things. Assuming that all of that is the case, then they come to me to okay. And what I try and do is, if it is an area where there's other people working on the project, like if you put in a project to work on alcohol use, right, then I might say like, oh, I would love to work with you on that. If you put in something on e-cigarette use, then I might say, oh, we have an investigator here at VCU who funded the e-cigarette questions, who's also really interested in that. And so I try and link up people with shared interests, both in part so that the people that helped fund the data collection have an opportunity to collaborate on those questions, and also so that, you know, to help with creating more collaborations across the scientific community. So essentially, I basically never say no, only if there's like an overlap in content area do I try and put people together and say, hey, why don't you all talk to this person because they're also working in this space. But it's really straightforward. It's basically just, if you're interested, send me an email. We'll get you access to the area where you can learn all about the project, and then you can send a short description of what you're interested in doing once you know more about what variables are available. And then after we get your form and it gets logged with the registry, then we send you the data files.
Perfect. We actually have quite a few questions here now.
Okay.
So I'll start in the order that I received them. So one of the first questions is, I would love to know how you see the aims of prevention of substance use with college students and distinguishing between experimentation and problem substance use, especially within the social context in which substance use in college can be seen as normative.
Yeah, so that's a great question. So one of the things that that we know from the basic genetic epidemiology literature is that there's, you know, a couple different, and this is of course a somewhat of an oversimplification, but we know that there are a few different big risk pathways, right? And so we know that externalizing characteristics and internalizing characteristics can put people at risk for risky substance use and the development of problems. So when I say externalizing characteristics, things like sensation seeking and increased risk taking and impulsivity, those are things that we know put people more at risk for risky substance use. And even if those individuals do mature out, so sort of getting at that, well, some substance use is normative, right? We know that individuals with some of these characteristics are more likely to use in more heavy and risky ways, which can have long-term consequences in terms of, you know, fights and legal and unwanted sexual consequences and things of that sort. So, so there's some concern that even though some risky use is in fact, you know, commonplace, that still I think there is opportunity for raising awareness and putting in place harm reduction strategies. We also know that people with externalizing characteristics, they are more likely to use in risky ways, but they're also more likely to mature out and less likely to develop substance use disorders as compared to people with internalizing characteristics. So these are people who tend to use more due to coping, use alcohol and other drugs as a means of coping, and are also more likely to suffer from depression and anxiety. So they are actually sometimes less likely to be engaged in that sort of, because so much of substance use in college is social, to be involved in some of those risk-taking social patterns, but they're actually more likely to go on to develop substance use disorders. So one of the things that we try and raise awareness about these different things that can make people more at risk. We've done this through different stall seat journal issues with our wellness center, as well as with programming that the wellness center does. But in addition, right now, what I have is a small, an R34, a developmental grant as well too, where, you know, as I mentioned, we're trying to always get around how can you get students interested in learning about harm reduction strategies and alcohol use in ways that will engage them, because they never want to do alcohol prevention programming, right? Which I understand. So what we're building out is essentially a super short, we're working with a graphic designer who does kind of like comic-based engaging format. It's sort of set up like a super short personality type quiz. So it's kind of all about you, right? Learn about you. Because, you know, that's one of the things that we know is people love taking those little quizzes about themselves. And so it's 10 short questions, and then they get personalized feedback about where they fall on different risk dimensions. And what are some of the good things about that? You know, being a risk taker is not a bad thing in general. CEOs tend to be higher risk takers, for example. But we also know, so it's sort of like, here's the good, here's the not so good, and then here's specific resources for individuals that are kind of like you, that fit that profile. And so we're building that out now as what we hope will be a creative way to tie the basic science findings to prevention and intervention that goes beyond the traditional ways that we've engaged in prevention and intervention on college campuses. So those are some of the things that we're working on.
Thank you. We're right at 1, but we still have a couple more questions. I don't want to go well past that, but I do want to at least try to read off some of them, and maybe we could give a short answer to a couple of these. One question says, amazing talk, thank you. I lead the Emory Psychology Twitter, and the original goal was to reach non-academic audiences with our research. But I found that all of our followers are other academics. Could you share some of your top recommendations for reaching non-academic audiences in the Atlanta community using Twitter and otherwise?
Oh, that's such a great question. I really wish I had a good answer for you. I will tell you, I'm not super social media savvy, and I use Twitter mainly to connect with other academics as well. I've talked to a lot of people who do work across social media platforms, and their big thing is figuring out where, you have to go to where your audience is. You can't try and bring your audience to you, right? And other academics are on Twitter, and that's who finds us. So I sometimes find that the best way to do that is actually getting out in the community. So what are the groups that you want to reach? In our case, for example, one of the groups we wanted to reach was young people in recovery, and talking to them and talking to our RAMs in recovery group about, okay, well, what are the effective ways to get out to, what are the media, what are the Reddit groups that you follow? What are, the different Facebook groups that exist? So try and figure out, by talking to the communities that you want to reach, where are they? Right? And then you go to them as opposed to trying to bring them to you, essentially. And I'm sorry I can't be more specific than that, but my understanding from working on this locally is that a lot of that kind of tends to be local. Sometimes you can find national groups. So for example, there's big national like recovery groups. Faces and Voices of Recovery is like one area if you're trying to reach, like in my case, persons in recovery, but it's going to be pretty specific to, I think, the group that you're trying to reach. So my overarching advice would be try and connect with those individuals and talk to them and go where they are, as opposed to trying to bring them to you.
Thank you. It says, hi, Dr. Dick, thank you for the great talk. What is the longitudinal retention rate like within cohorts? Additionally, what proportion of people contacted for a more in-depth study end up actually participating?
Oh yeah, really great questions. You're asking all the hard things. So participation definitely falls off, right? So we get about 70% who initially enroll, and then it just kind of falls off from there. It goes down to about like 60. So of those who enroll, about 80% will do their follow-up freshman spring survey, and then it drops off from there. So then we get like 70% who do their sophomore survey, and then like 60% who do their junior survey. It falls off pretty precipitously. And I will tell you that we have tried everything we can think of to keep them engaged, and it is really hard. Like, that is why I would say getting them when they first show up on campus, that that's when you'll get the highest enrollment, and they're excited and they're enthusiastic. And I have had conversations with other faculty about what are we doing on college campuses that they get, one, they get busier, but two, they also get less cynical or more cynical and less engaged and don't want to keep engaging in research. And so, having more creative minds thinking about how do we keep that up, I would love, because we've only had moderate success, essentially. So and remind me, what was the other part of the question? Oh, the spin-off projects. So it varies tremendously depending on how much the spin-offs are paying and how intensive they are. And so it ranges, and when they try and launch them. So some people will try and launch during the summer, and there's very few students, obviously, who are checking their VCU email accounts during the summer. The if you try and launch, you know, like during finals time, I mean, there's sort of some obvious things, but some faculty, just the timing of their IRB approvals and whatnot don't align perfectly. So if you don't launch during summer or during any of these other, you know, around spring break or around finals or midterms, then participation rates are higher. When they pay more and are considered more interesting by the students, we've also found that participation rates are higher. And I mean, they vary anywhere from like 25% of invited students who will enroll in a spinoff to 75% of invited students who enroll in a spinoff. So there's a lot of variability depending on some, you know, some pretty basic practices related to, you know, how well you engage students in a research project, and that are also sometimes out of faculty's hands. But one of the things I think is the more that you can make it interesting to your participants, right? So often we will use super jargon study titles, and if you can really relate to participants like why what you're doing is interesting, I think that goes a huge way.
Right. Thank you. And do you have time for the next two? I don't want to.
I do, and certainly if other folks have to run off to other things,
Okay.
then but I don't have anything for,
Okay.
you know, I have an open hour, so I'm happy to chat with
Thank
you all
you.
and answer questions.
Thank you. Well, I have one question here that says, do you have any data on substance use rates before and after the students took your happiness course? And did this approach seem more effective in lowering substance abuse than usual educational approaches?
Oh, okay. That's such a great question. And I'm so glad that you asked, because so we didn't explicitly look at substance use outcomes because it's tricky. It's tricky to link their data to participation in the class, since participation in the class is a little bit more identifiable because there's smaller numbers of them. And one of the things that we have set up in the project is a firewall between faculty and knowing the names of anybody in the project. So unlike in another research study, whereas the PI, I would conceivably have access to the names of people who are enrolled in my study and contact information. In this case, I don't. No faculty can ever get the names of any students who participate. So there's never any perception of coercion. So, okay, that aside, what we can do is have our Office of Decision Support and Planning they know who was in the class, and we can link up the people who were in the class with their subsequent academic records and retention at the university. So that doesn't get at the substance use and mental health piece directly, but it does get at, is it keeping them at the university? And in fact, they are retained at much higher rates than what you would expect based on the average student at the university, even when you try and account for and match on, like, you know, pre-class GPA and other sorts of things. So when we pulled that data together and showed it to the administration, they were super excited because it definitely suggested that, look, being a part of this class is making a difference in retaining the students at the university.
Thank you. And so the next one is a comment. It's just Lee Wilkers from Roland's Global Health Department. He said, no question, but go Rams. He did his undergrad at VCU and has participated in Spent for Science, which was a great experience. And so just thank you for the great talk.
So happy. Thank you so much. You know, I randomly stumbled across on Twitter, somebody brought to my attention, sort of looped me into this whole feed, and it was a bunch of VCU alumni. And they were all, somebody had started, hey, you remember that crazy project we did our first year where we, you know, got paid $10 and we all got t-shirts and we spit in tubes, and then there were hundreds of students who were all replying to this, and it was hilarious to watch them talking about their recollections of the project. And it was sort of like, I wonder whatever happened with all that data. And it was a really fun way for me to then be able to link into the conversation and say, oh my gosh, look at it, like, check back to this website and here's information about all the things that we're doing with your data, and thank you so much for participating. And so yeah, I always love to hear from VCU students who have participated, and thank you for making everything possible.
And we have two more. It says, thanks for the great presentation. The project is quite participatory and engaging, and this has probably enhanced your effectiveness. Would you highlight a little on how your project has been therapeutic in the area of substance abuse, especially for participants who've been retained in the study?
Yeah, so that's a really interesting question, in the sense that you wonder if participation alters the natural trajectory, right? Like, is participating in itself having any kind of beneficial effect? And on the one hand, if you are an epidemiologist who's trying to understand a phenomenon, then you would hope that you're studying it is not altering the phenomenon. On the other hand, as someone who, of course, cares about our students, and the ultimate goal is to improve their well-being, you would hope that it is having a positive effect. In some ways, we can't tease those things apart, since we do invite the entire cohort to enroll, right? We don't really know what would VCU without Spit for Science in 2020 look like, because that is an alternate reality that doesn't exist. So all I can say is that substance use and mental health challenges are really complex problems. And so do I think that we are making a difference when we study the specific programming that we're putting in place? Does it appear to be making a difference? Yes. Do I think that just having the study, though, and having students who can kind of participate in it, in so many different ways, like we've talked about it, I don't have any data to suggest that is, I have anecdotal data to suggest it's made a difference in some of their lives, whether it's on their substance use or trajectories of what they wanted to do. But the really interesting question of, is the project in and of itself having a difference? I don't think we exactly know the answer to that. It's a really interesting one.
Thank you. And the last question for today says, great talk, Dr. Dick. My question was about recruitment strategies for various demographic groups. I was wondering if you could speak more on the recruitment strategies that you use to get higher participation rates. For example, were there any specific strategies you use to encourage males to participate, since females are more likely to volunteer?
Yeah, so I have to say, we didn't do anything really strategic, except that one of the things that we did when we enrolled incoming classes is that I mentioned the love and liquor presentations that our former wellness director used to run. And so what would happen is, and they were great, they were super entertaining. She used to say, I promise you'll learn something no matter who you are or how much you know. And I mean, I thought I knew a lot about, substance use and related behaviors, and I learned a lot from sitting in there. So the RAs used to bring their halls, and as I mentioned, we'd get like 90% of the students who would come through. And I would get up as a little part of that and just talk about the project and, why this was so exciting to have this at VCU. And oftentimes, if I remembered, I would sort of throw out a challenge to the males and say, oh, we want everybody to participate, and here's all the great things that can come from your participating. And just so you guys out there know, women tend to participate at much higher rates. So here's my challenge to you, is to, prove all those researchers wrong and show up and participate too. And they did. And I always threw out when I would present to the students, which I do a lot of as well, say and hats off to our VCU men. Okay, I will tell you, over time, we mentioned that there's drop off across the follow-ups, and the men do drop off faster than the women. And I have not had any success in getting them to try and, to keep their participation rates quite as high. Other interesting just kind of asides about participation, I mentioned a lot of the work that we did around our African American students. I actually looked at some point, we give the students a kind of second chance to join the study in the spring of their freshman year. If they don't join at some point in their freshman year, then they're kind of out for the follow-ups across the rest of their college years. But what I found was that more minority students joined in the spring than in the fall, which I think might reflect the fact that there was some a little bit of wanting to wait and see about this project and who these researchers were, and by the spring they felt more familiar and more comfortable with it. I mean, we're out and about in the campus a lot, and so I found that really encouraging, and I think it speaks to the fact of like engaging and being out there and being seen, and having a diverse research team that is seen and, you know, talking about these issues. And one of my colleagues, Karen Chartier, on the project has also, not with Spit for Science, but done other work where in her recruitment materials for a genetic project, she explicitly addressed questions that came up in focus groups that we did with underrepresented groups. And so they were things like, you know, what are you going to do with our DNA? And how do we know it's not going to be used for discriminatory purposes? And, you know, things of that sort. And she addressed them head on. And so she did a random experiment where half of the folks got kind of the standard IRB, all the things that you would have to say in a consent, and the other half, and sort of a generic, you know, FAQs about DNA collection and, you know, all the standard stuff about we'll protect your identity, whatever. And the other half were randomly assigned to get that, but also questions, FAQs that were designed to explicitly address concerns that had come up in our underrepresented groups. And what she found is that individuals who got in the consents, the invitations that had the concerns specific to minority groups, in addition to kind of all our standard IRB stuff, were more likely to participate and were more likely to send their DNA samples by a fair amount. I mean, it was like 50% versus 60%. So I think all of these things just speak to, if you want to recruit specific groups that you know might have different concerns or historically have not participated in research for whatever reason at the same levels, then, you know, you just want to transparently make an effort to engage those groups. And in my experience and in everything that we've tried and the research we've done around this, it really suggests it makes a difference.
Thank you so much. I think that wraps it up. That was an excellent and insightful presentation and question and response session. We want to thank you so much from the MAPme team and all of our attendees here. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your day, actually taking extra time out of your day to come and talk with us. We are so thankful to have had you, and I've learned quite a bit, and I still have more questions, and I'm excited to continue to work with you in the future. So thank you all for joining our call today, and thank you once again, Dr. Dick.
Thank you so much. And yes, open invitation to work with our data. We would love to collaborate with you all. And hopefully at some point I will get to actually come visit in person and we can start mapping some of that out.
Definitely, definitely. All right, you all. Thank you for today.
Bye.
Thank you.